What's up guys, you're watching Life Fight TCG. I got a Pauper video for you today. Now, the last time I did an update for Pauper Tron was right after the Expedition map ban, so that list was a little bit speculative. It wasn't exactly clear like how the metagame would turn out after that, and also it was like relatively untested. So now we've had a few more weeks of like league and challenge results to see sort of like what the meta looks like and what the Tron decks are playing. So this list is like a combination of my own interpretation of like how the meta looks, taking ideas from like other people's lists and also combining them with my own like tech choices as well. So I'll just quickly get into the list. So of course we have the 4 of every Tron land, 4 tower, 4 power plant, 4 Urza's mine. Obviously playing a full set of those lands. These are supposed to be Thriving Isle, but they have only just been released in paper in my region, so I haven't had a chance to pick those up yet. But yeah, this is meant to be 3 Thriving Isle. Then 3 Island and 1 Thornwood Falls and 1 Cave of Temptation. So I wouldn't play more than 1 cave because the mana filtering ability is too painful if you ever end up with a hand that has multiple of these. And the mana is already pretty good when you have the 4 Prism and the 4 Ornament to help you get all 5 colors of mana anyway. Then the 3 Island and the Thornwood Falls. So the 1 Thornwood Falls can possibly just be another island if you want. The reason why it's the green gain land over any other color is just to help you play the Moments Piece and the fog spells early versus the aggro decks. That's the situation when you're usually most pressed for colors, and having 1 gain land in the list can just sort of help versus burn sometimes by flickering it. But that's, again, it's sort of like a pretty marginal thing. You can just play another island over this if you don't like the tap land. And we're also playing for the last land, bringing it up to 22, 1 Bojuka Bog. So in the Tron mirror, this card is very useful. I'm going to get into a bit more why this card is important when I talk about the other cards in the list. So for the creatures, it's pretty standard. The 4 Mulldrifter, one of the best cards in the deck, of course you always play 4. Then Mnemonic Wall, 3 of those, and then also 3 Stonehorn Dignitary. So I think maybe this is 1 less Stonehorn Dignitary than the previous list, because Tron is such a big part of the metagame right now, and this is kind of dead in the mirror, so I think you can afford to trim 1 copy of the anti-combat card. But yeah, the 4 Mulldrifters and the 3 Wall is like really stock. Then on for the spells, 4 Ornament and 4 Prism is pretty standard, like they're just the best mana fixing / drawing cards. Pretty easy to understand why these cards are good in the deck, I think. Then the card filtering / tutoring, we have the 2 Mystical Teachings, the 1 Alchemy. Some people aren't playing this card, but I think it's still fine. 1 Compulsive Research, and then 4 Impulse. So in the previous video, I suggested that like Preordain might be the best cantrip to help like find the Tron pieces and just be in general like that kind of early game card filtering kind of effect. But being able to hold up your mana at instant speed for like ornament activations and your counter spells and everything is a pretty big upside for Impulse, just in addition to the fact that it looks at more cards than Preordain. So yeah, that's pretty significant, I think. So yeah, 4 impulse. And also, I guess the other card, which is technically kind of like a tutoring / consistency thing, is 1 crop rotation. So in the past, I really disliked playing this card in Tron decks, basically because it's so vulnerable to Spell Stutter Sprite. The Fairies decks are like a little bit worse now, you could argue, with the lack of Mystic Sanctuary. Well, they're obviously worse. The question is how much more played are they or not. And it seems to be like a little bit less, but maybe not that much. But overall, this card is strong enough that I think it's worth playing just as a one-off. In situations where you really need Tron, you can Teachings for this to help you find your last land that you need. And of course it works with the Bojuka Bog, so again I'm going to sort of explain that a bit later. But yeah, this is just worth remembering. The deck has 1 crop rotation now. Then the Flicker package, 2 Ghostly Flicker, 1 Ephemerate, 1 Capsize, which I sort of include as part of the Flicker package, even though it's you can obviously target your opponent's stuff with it as well. Then 2 counterspells, 1 Prohibit, 1 Memory Lapse, or actually 3 because of the 1 Exclude as well. And then the defensive spells, we got 1 Tangle and 1 Weather the Storm. And then the last 2 spells are the Reaping the Graves, so the value gets stuff back from the graveyard. And a new card downshifted from Double Masters is 1 Abrade. So having a main deck removal spell is pretty nice. It kills like Ninja, Delver of Secrets, any of those like small like fairies creatures. And the other big thing that it kills that's really important is Axebane Guardian out of the Walls combo deck, so having a removal spell for that in your main deck is a pretty nice option to have. And then in the Tron Mirror, having a way to fight over your opponent's ornaments is really important. And then when you're playing against like Affinity or whatever, you can target their lands or their Meon forces. So yeah, it's a really flexible main deck card. Like in the video I showed before, I was playing like Resounding Thunder in that slot, which is kind of a joke card, really. Abrade's obviously much more powerful. The only problem with, quote-unquote problem with Abrade is that it can't actually win the game. Like it can't damage your opponent, unlike some of the other variations of this kind of red removal effect. But yeah, the fact that it's like incinerate target creature or destroy artifact, both of those effects are really good to have in the main deck. And Reaping the Graves is just the best way to win like an attrition war in matchups with counterspells, because you just buy back all of the stuff from your graveyard, and then they can't counter it effectively because they have Storm, and then you win that attrition battle and just beat them down with your Mulldrifters or whatever, while you Mnemonic Wall or your counterspells back so they can't do anything. And so yeah, so the main interesting thing is the inclusion of the crop rotation plus the Bojuka Bog and the mana base. So the important thing to remember is that like the Reaping the Graves tech is like becoming part of the standard list now. Like it's a thing that everybody uses. So if the matchup comes down to this card, you can't expect to win the match by fighting over it with like Pyroblasts, for example. Like if your game plan revolves all around like Pyroblasting Mulldrifters and Pyroblasting Denrogal Horrors and like Pyroblasting opponents' Mnemonic Walls and trying to get ahead that way, like eventually the game will get to a point where they will like resolve a Reaping the Graves and get all of that back and then overwhelm you. So you need a way to fight Reaping the Graves that doesn't involve the stack, basically, like, because this just trumps every kind of counterspell effect. So as you can expect, the way to do that is when they play Reaping the Graves, targeting all of this stuff, you bring your Bog out and you exile their graveyard. So you negate the effect of their Reaping the Graves, and then you can pull ahead that way. So again, that's a big part of why the card is in the deck now, to fight this angle of attack in the mirror. And like maybe against some other weird decks it can be useful as well. Like if you your opponent's trying to cast Gutmag Angle or whatever, you can just like flicker this for value if you have a wall out to slow them down, things like that. But yeah, a big reason for why this card is in the deck now is because of how it specifically interacts with Reaping the Graves. And then the crop rotation is also just a fine card to help assemble Tron as well. So it's a relatively free include. I don't think it's worth playing other utility lands. Like the deck has played things like Mortuary Mire in the past, or Haunted Fengraf, for example. I wouldn't play a card like that. I think it clunks up the mana base too much. Having this card as disruption is the most important thing. Using crop rotation just as a way to get Mulldrifter back on top of your library, for example, is probably not worth it. Especially because a lot of the reason why you played a card like Mortuary Mire was to help you get more utility with your oh no, that argument doesn't make sense. Yeah, you just have to accept that, like in a situation where you have crop rotation but you already have Tron assembled, then the best thing you're going to be able to do with it is like upgrade one of your lands into an Urza's Tower, or you know, if it's a matchup where the Bojuka Bog doesn't do anything. But I think that's a acceptable place to be, because in those situations you should normally be pretty favored anyway, I think, just because your Tron deck is so much more powerful than the other stuff in the format. If you already have all your mana online, which you do in the case where you're considering using crop rotation to search for something other than a Tron land. So yeah, that's essentially why these changes, why these two cards are in the deck now. And then the sideboard, not too much different. So I think the last time the Exclude was a sideboard card, and it's been moved to the main deck. I can't remember how exactly the ins and outs of what was cut to make that work, but I'm sure if you really care about it, you can check the previous video and go figure it out. So the sideboard is for Hydroblast, basically just for the burn matchup, or like red deck wins, basically. They're the only places you really want it. Against Bully, you probably board in like at least a few copies of these, because the only realistic way they can win is if they get lucky and they like Molten Rain you out of a bad spot. So you probably board in like one or two of those just to be safe, but it's not the main reason why it's there. Then 4 Pyroblasts just to help in the mirror, and then versus Delver decks, and I guess other blue decks as well, but they don't really exist in the format right now. It's just Tron mirrors and Delver. Then the Scattershot as like your wide removal. So again, like the Reaping the Graves, the fact that it has Storm means that it's basically uncounterable, which means it's great versus Delver. And the Fairies builds of Delver are more popular now than they were a little while ago, because Oscar Franco has been doing really well with the blue-black version. Then 2 Moments Piece just to help shore up the aggro matchups versus like Bogles and Stompy and stuff, just to have more anti-combat cards. Then the 1 Ancient Grudge just as some artifact hate, like in the Tron mirror to kill their ornaments or versus affinity, yeah, that kind of thing. Then the one Dispel just to help in the counter wars, like counter your opponent's Pyroblast and things like that. Or counter your opponent's crop rotation as well. So there's something to watch out for in the mirror matches. Then one Entourage of Trest. I talked about why I think this card is good in the previous video, or at least why I think it's good. The main reason is that, like, in the Tron mirrors, you don't really want your trump card to be blue, because why I'm playing this card is basically instead of the Denrova Horror slot, which is what most other people are playing in their sideboards. So having your like big mana trump card for the mirror be a thing that's blue is a little bit difficult, because your opponent's obviously going to be boarding in all their Pyroblast versus you. So boarding in a 6 mana card that gets hit by a Pyroblast is not optimal. And the other thing is that to get most of the mileage out of your Denrova Horror, you need to be flickering it. And like I explained before, a big part of how the Tron mirror plays out now, as more people catch on to this sort of technology, is that the people are fighting over the graveyard more, which makes it a lot harder to chain flicker stuff. And again, flickering things is usually, if it's not Ephemerate based, or it's vulnerable to Pyroblast as well. So yeah, so Denrova Horror needs a lot of like synergy things around it for it to work to its maximum potential, and also the fact that it's blue means that it's very Pyroblast vulnerable, whereas Entourage of Trest, it's not Pyroblastable, and it doesn't require any other card, any other kind of interaction around it. You don't need to flicker it. You don't need any like graveyard synergies. You just play it and become the Monarch, and then you start drawing all of your Pyroblasts and your graveyard hate and things like that while you are attacking for 4. So I think, in my mind, it seems like a good idea, but it's still something that needs to be tested a bit more, I think. And then, like I say, if you're really not convinced by this, you can just play it one Denrova Horror in the spot, like what everyone else is doing. And then the last card is one Cast Down. This is another downshift from Double Masters. And again, like, I think the Abrade main deck is more flexible than this. Like, there aren't that many huge creatures you care about killing, and the Abrade can clean up all the small creatures, and then you have like Capsize, for example, in your main deck if you really have to like bounce something like a Gourmet Angler or whatever. But then in the sideboard, having an extra removal option is pretty solid as well. If you're playing against like the Angler Delver deck, for example, then like Abrade can't kill an Angler, and Scattershot is probably not going to do that job very well either. So having the Cast Down is pretty good. Like Hampu's lost in the top 8 of the challenge last week in the mirror because his opponent like boarded Crushes in and he wasn't ready for it. So just having like a way to fight over your opponent's creatures can be useful even in the mirror match where you think it's not really a matchup where like you care about removal that much, and it sort of feeds into the like become the Monarch and then just kill their stuff, like 1-for-1 them, make sure you're jamming their graveyard with your Bojuka Bog and stuff. So it sort of goes well with that plan, and just having more interaction versus like the combo decks like elves and wolves and things, and then yeah, versus aggro stuff, it's probably alright too. So yeah, Cast Down just as a Miser removal spell. In the past, people used to play like Doomblade as a one-off in their sideboard sometimes. And obviously it's super similar to that, it's just slightly better because it kills Angler basically. And yeah, so that's the list. Yeah, the biggest change is the Impulse over the Preordains. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 17 because I got these two. Yeah, yeah. So the biggest change is the impulse instead of the preordains, and then the crop rotation plan. And I guess adding the Abrade from Double Masters now instead of the bit of a silly suggestion, Resounding Thunder. Oh, and I guess playing Exclude main deck. Yeah, so having the plan of like Reaping the Graves instead of Pulse of Marasa is a little bit interesting. Because part of the reason why Tron used to be considered so resilient in the past to land destruction, partly that was the fact that you could Pulse of Marasa your lands back if your opponents destroyed them. So not having that angle in the deck is like a little bit scary. But land destruction, first of all, it's not that popular. And crop rotation kind of gives you a similar outplay potential, quote unquote, because if they target one of your lands to destroy it with a Thermocast or whatever random land destruction spell your opponent's using, you can rotate it away in response. So it's just like a 1 mana flicker kind of thing that can protect your land. So yeah, I think not having the Pulse of Marasa is probably fine. There are some weird situations where like the matchup isn't so aggressive where you want Weather the Storm in your deck after sideboarding, like a card that just gains life and does nothing else. But then when you don't have Pulse of Marasa in your 75 and you're boarding this card out, like there are weird situations where you just wish you had some source of like incidental life gain to play around, like I don't know, Grey Merchant or something. Or, you know, like the last few points of damage from like a Viridian Longbow or things like that, where you wish you had some kind of life gain, but you just don't because you cut this card to your sideboard. You can kind of like get like some little life gain out if you get your gain land and you start flickering it. So that's another good argument for playing a card like this somewhere. But yeah, you just have to be a little bit careful about that, playing the list with no Pulse of Marasa. But apart from that, I think the list is really solid. Yeah, it still seems to be like a top dog in the metagame, even after the all the bans and things. And I hope the people figure out a way to like start fighting against this. Because obviously after I've owned all these cards, I don't really want to see it get banned. But yeah, I think it's like an interesting, pretty fun deck to play. But I mean, if you're familiar with Pauper, either you know what kind of player you are by now, or right? Like either you love it or you hate it. So yeah, that's it for today. The Tron deck. This is Li-Fi TCG signing up.